And it looks like we are live. Just gonna go ahead and check to make sure the audio is doing good. Okay, we're good. Um, hey everyone. I hope that you're doing. Hope that you're doing well. Um, yeah. So the title is pretty intense. Awakening to a deeper faith through divorce. And this video was actually teased a little bit in the Awakening in Big Pharma, where I had expressed to my girlfriend at the time that I was getting depressed and that like I needed to leave this institution. It was just wearing me down. And she had told me then, but what about the money? And that was kind of like the first, chink in the chain and the armor that really led to this relationship and marriage being dissolved. And I really just want to always say first and foremost, this is intended to always bring more awareness to the journey of life that we all have as a commonality. I think when people meet me, they don't even realize that, I was in an 11-year relationship and nearly 4-year marriage and was divorced. They would never think that. They would never assume that I came from a very violent home because of how cheery and happy I am. But we all go through things, and this whole spiritual experience Wednesday is meant to just inspire and to get a little peek behind the curtain of the human experience that really builds who we are as, human beings and spiritual beings. And I will say that this relationship itself, the entirety of it, brought me into not only who you see before you as the spiritual man that I am, but it brought me into a deeper relationship with God, with myself, and with truth. So, I always want to preface, with this one, especially because of the theme itself, that the relationship had a lot of highs, a lot of nourishing moments, but the different stories that I'll get into throughout the connection also brought about many pathways that were only going to bring more darkness. And it really is a testament of just resiliency and strength and understanding. And ultimately, with this one, it's faith with trust, like really trusting in the universe, really trusting in God. And I guess we'll just kind of get right into it. Don't forget to smash that like if you can. I haven't really talked about a lot of this stuff before, especially publicly, because we tried to be very low key about it because my ex-wife was very hurt. It's my cat. Uh, she just got fed and she probably wants to play, but so yeah, she was really hurt by me filing for divorce, and we tried to be really civil about it because of just the look. And I don't talk about it much. I don't really need to unless it's really close, intimate circles. But hmm, I have notes. Like, I always got notes and things, but it's like, gosh, where to even really begin? Well, firstly, I guess I can say this relationship was one that saved my life. Without my ex-wife, I don't know where I would be at. Just the relationship and how it unfolded, and meeting at night, like we met in college, like 18, 19 years old. And that summer of work release, she was there for me. We chatted every day. We saw each other's face like every day just through technology, obviously, and like webcam and stuff. But um, it's what really kept me afloat and made me feel that I actually was like worthy of love. And that in and of itself really awakened, I would say, like the provider, the protector in me. And throughout college, I've literally like saved that woman's life like numerous times just from some creeps, some sketchy situations. And I always felt that I had to really fight for our relationship and our connection because she had saved my life. And I felt like I owed that to her. And I think that's one of those, first kind of traps in a relationship, is that if you're always banking and always kind of justifying it through past and not the present, that it's going to come back around and hurt you. And ultimately, like I have inertia and years of this type of mentality of like, like she was there for me when I really needed it, even though she didn't know it. And I'm going to honor that. And I tried as hard as I could for 11 years. Um, and especially, the only really real reason why we got married is because it was another one of those moments of me trying to help their insecurities, of letting them know, like, hey, like, I'm here for you. Like, I love you. Like, I commit and dedicate myself to you and this journey. And, you know, And I'll just kind of preface it here, you can't fall in love with potential. You can't bank on potential. Things have to be shown and they have to be dedicated to. And, I guess like the biggest advisory note that I would ever say here is that, you can't have a relationship if you're on a spiritual path with someone who isn't about their own personal development outside of like work. Um, and that was something that really kind of like created a lot of tension and stress. So, one of the things that was again in the relationship, was getting a lot of different like notes and just different hints of their character and how they were as a person that I was really ignoring because of those past efforts and those past promises. And ultimately, it led to, one of those first heartbreaks of expressing my depression from working in big pharma and wanting to leave, and that being met with, but what about the money? And, for me, that was really heartbreaking ultimately because it was like my one moment of vulnerability and opening up. And ever since that moment, there was a lot of things just like that kind of came into question and were very present, that there was some character differences here that I could see and foreshadow that were going to lead into bigger issues. And I've always kind of known in terms of relationships, especially ones that start off in college, that it's like, hey, like we're gonna grow up. There's things that we're gonna lean into that we didn't even know we were into, years from now. And if we don't focus on our communication and our connection, then, I do see that there could be some like turbulent waters, to say the least, moving forward. And I remember even before we moved back out to Seattle from back east, I had told her about a vision that I had, because I meditated after a fight and because I was really upset that we had, and it was a little stupid disagreement on timing of things. And it was actually essentially around my wanting to just, I don't know, back quickly, and whether or not she was gonna come with us, or with me, I should say. Us, I say me and Mosley, because Mosley was the cat that, I got in college, but that if she was gonna come back east, back west with us. And we had a little conflict about that because I expressed some reservations, like, "Is this really what you wanna do?" And I meditated on it, and I essentially saw that I was going into the water. I was getting ready to play in the sand, and she was setting up a table, like a picnic table, on some train tracks. And in the distance, I see smokestacks. And I can't see the train, but you can start to kind of like feel it and hear it through like the choo choo, and you can see the smoke. And I kept telling her, like, hey, get off the tracks, come in the water. And when I was sitting with that, I knew it was the sense of my spiritual development, that I'm going into these waters of freedom and liberation, and I'm seeing the kind of same normie stuff that just inevitably leads to suffering. And that's those train tracks, and that's setting up the picnic. And I expressed this to her, and it kind of led into another conflict of like, you know, as things do when you express reservations when someone wants to eagerly come with you, I guess. But um, it kind of set things up and set the stage for a lot of things that happened later on. Like that entire relationship was really just one person leaning into their spiritual path and another kind of doubling down on the normie life, and the vicious cycle that caused a lot of the traumas and wounds that we both experienced as kids. And it there was moments like that where I would express my truth and it would be pulled back with some just really cold treatment. And there was even more things that would unfold. So one of the biggest ones that kind of like brought about the first separation was me choosing to follow my passions and using my personal business to get into really my creative expression again in music. And I was working and helping out a band, doing some sponsorship stuff and kind of helping with tour management. And we went on this tour in Hawaii, and that caused a huge fight with us because like she couldn't come with because of work, but the fact that I was going to still go despite her not being able to, and she got really mad at me. And it mirrored something that happened in college where it was a buddy's birthday and we wanted to go skydiving for his birthday. So decided to go skydiving, and I remember, you know, that was like the one fight that she told her parents about. And at that point, my ex-father-in-law, he told her to like end the relationship because I wasn't going to like listen to her concerns, despite that being like the only time that we actually had a real, I would say, like fight, um, where it was just like, are you like, what are you talking about? Like, no, I'm gonna go. And that was the only thing that, she had heard of or her parents had heard. And so when I'd heard of how all that kind of played out, that was one of those things where I was just like, okay, like I'm gonna keep that as like a note in the back of just where he really stands and how he views me. And so we fast forward to this, and I go on the tour and come back, and there was just so much just negativity and passive aggressiveness that um it's always interesting when you see like the light at the other end. The grass is greener on the other side, and you can feel and see where your life is, and you actually are around people who value you and can witness you. Where it brought me into a point where ultimately, like, I just couldn't take it anymore. And like, and I talk about this being like, one of the big like catalyzing events for the first separation that we had. But, you know, I will express that like I love so hard. And in any type of relationship, I have passion. And for me, I'm a teacher in a lot of ways. So it's like try to come about things in all the different angles and ways. And for years, I just felt like I was just like slamming my head against the wall. It's like at this point, we were already married, and there was just no end to the passive aggressiveness, the choosing work over the relationship, the fears, and there was a lot of conflicts even with like her family and like the in-laws that were just traits that kept putting me in that position of like, man, like I can't do this the rest of my life. Like this is putting me down a path where it's not bringing out the best in me. It's only making me frustrated. But at the other end, I'm having like all of this insane spiritual growth because every time we would have a conflict, which was literally like every day there'd be something that was like done towards me and done towards the home and done towards Mosley, that it was like this is unloving behavior and like, hey, this needs to stop, to the point where like I wanted to get out of this world, and I knew I wasn't going to go down the path of suicide because that was already a thing that from high school and the previous ones that we've talked about. um that wasn't a thing, but I wanted to get out. So I really sought like a real spiritual escape. That's what I thought enlightenment was at one point in time, that I would just kind of, phase out of this reality. But because of the suffering that I experienced in the relationship, it pushed me deeper and deeper into spirituality. It pushed me deeper into trusting in the timing of things, of how everything's unfolding, where it's like, okay, there's a conflict going, you know, I'm instantly taking it, learning, applying, and growing. And this is where the hopium kind of kicks in, where it's like, I'm now hoping that she's growing too. But it got to the point, again, like this is 2020, right in the beginning of 2020. I should say it was actually February, tail end of February 2020. And I had reached my breaking point. There was just so much hurt, so much hate. There was a real bad family emergency that went on for her side of the family. Um, and just with how that was carried, essentially one of her cousins like murdered his whole family and killed himself. And with how that was talked about, and I should really say lack thereof talked about in the family, like that was one of those really big red flags that I was just like, you know what, like from just the personal relationship to the familial relationship to like the in-laws. And I love a lot of her in-laws, and I love her uncles. They're great people. But like the biggest things for me was like the nuclear family on her end, with the coldness and the really just shitty treatment. Like her in-laws did not, her mom did, but her father was an asshole to me. Always thought that I was the person that was getting her in her like drunken problems and shit like that. But my ex-wife only stopped drinking because I was like put my foot down in the relationship. It was like, you're a bad drunk, you're a mean person, and like I can't be with you if you're not going to be sober in that sense. Like you can't handle your alcohol. Because she definitely had an alcohol abuse problem. But like, and again, like I don't like to throw shade, but like this is all context of things that people just don't know, because I keep that type of stuff really like tight knit for the most part. But it's important for the story. So all these things are kind of like cascading and accumulating. And it gets to this point where when I get back from the tour, I'm just next level passive aggressiveness. And then not only that, but just straight up like aggressive for her and cold. It's so imagine, it's like a long day, coming back from clients and work and you want to go in for a kiss and you get like a finger and hand in your face that says, I'm in a meeting, and they're on mute and the screen's not even on. So for me, when it comes to like unloving stuff, like we're at a point where like we were talking about kids and things of this nature, and I knew where my family was in their development and where her family was in their development. And like, I'm not trying to repeat and pass on those generational traumas and wounds. And to see the behaviors that she would complain to me about through her upbringing, and she was starting to pour all those onto me. And again, specifically, like really intensely after I got back from that trip, um, I was just done. So I typed up the paperwork, filled out the paperwork, and I served her and told her, I was like, you know what, these past like month plus since I've been back, and said my whole spiel and just like the different things that she had been saying and doing, that like I don't feel comfortable in this relationship anymore, and I am asking for a separation. I think we should get divorced. And that kind of like obviously was jarring for her because I had been saying things of that nature for a while. Not, I shouldn't say like for a while, but like for about a year before that, I was just like, hey, like we have serious issues that we need to work on, and we're not going to last. And this is a serious problem with me. Like this is one of those integrity, like toe the lines, like no more type of things. And if this isn't resolved, like we need to figure something out. And at that time, I thought, that's the only thing that I can do is just. So we were separated for about a week, and I went no contact, and I told her, I was like, hey, like, because she tried to go in trauma response mode and just like hit me up all the time. And I was like, listen, like, we need no contact. Like, I need to clear my head. You need to clear your head. And let's give it a little bit. So she went and stayed with a coworker. And it was like on that seventh day where we finally like had a conversation. And this is where, my hopium and my really just deep desire to be witnessed and loved, kind of bit me in the butt. But as it goes, it's all divine timing. So in the conversation, she told me everything that I wanted to hear. All of the things that I had said, in the past of just like real bad integrity issues, relational things, the kind of like foresights with the traumas and how they're getting passed on and that nature. She unsolicitedly talked about all of that stuff, which gave me such a fire of hope. Like, wow, like it hasn't been falling on deaf ears. She's actually listened, because the behavior would never show that. Um, and it was one of those things where I was just like, okay, you know, I I'll tear up these papers and you can come back home. Like, so one, but there were some stipulations. I said that in the conversations, like, but we need to have like a real like face to face conversation about this. And so it's like the next day, go pick her up. She comes back, and we had a real like heart to heart where it was me just kind of setting up I would say like the urgency of the matter, where I said like, hey, like I really appreciate what you told me, and I want to give this another shot, but I'm not going to say that this is a forever thing. Like, I will not do that. I've already invested so much of my time in my life because, again, like the conversations and things of like teaching moments and opportunities to grow and heal. I spent way more time on her than like my own clients. Um, so I let her know, like, straight up, I was like, we need to really dial in us and our connection. And at this point, she was trying to, she was saying therapy, therapy, therapy. And I just know myself personally. I was just like, listen, like, I would love for us to actually like have consistent talks and conversations for at least like a regular kind of program, which was like 12 weeks. So like 3 months, let's really dial in like our weekly check-ins, our intimate time, all the things. And then if you feel the need for therapy, go to therapy. And we met, we had consistent check-ins, and every time we had conversations and in these kind of like more like ceremonial, like just really just open quality time conversations. The questions that I was asking, she would be essentially remembering old traumas and wounds that she was throwing onto me as if I was the origin. And that went on for, we went a little bit longer. We went 13 weeks doing that. And she didn't get help after that. It was kind of like one of those things where it was received in arrogance, like, oh, I learned a thing. And then just whoop, I'm not going to apply the thing, or I'm not going to live in the thing. And during our heart to heart, I told her, I was like, I'll give this another year of an investment. and we can reevaluate it then, just to see if like this is the move. Because again, I love hard. I'm not going to quit. I want to do it all. And when it came down to it, she didn't. She didn't grow. She didn't heal. She didn't learn. And it really kind of like cascaded towards the end of the relationship where, because the blessing of the timing of this too is that when the first separation had ended, it was just like, okay, cool, we're going to dedicate all this time. There was so much like of that hurrah energy. We got this. And then lockdowns hit. So I think that's always an important thing to remember, just timing wise, is that it was that moment of, oh, wow, now we are forced to really be like in intimate space with one another. So we had so many external signs of life being like, hey, yeah, this is a great time to dial it in. This is a great time for you just to really like heal. Because she pretty much was never going to work outside of home, because obviously everything was remote. And then I was still seeing my clients at their homes and things like that. Um, so my life didn't really change at all during COVID, but like her life had a very big, shift. And it was a beautiful invitation to lean more into being in and like present in the relationship. So a year goes on from that. And for everyone's just full disclosure, I worked in big pharma. I know all the things. I was not about how they were going about COVID. I even have a video on this channel that got my channel, like this current channel that had gotten it, what do they called it? Like flagged. That's when my channels started getting messed with, not only here, but even on Facebook. Started having a bunch of viewers and watch time stripped. Excuse me. And that's still some of the stuff that I've dealt with in terms of like the shadow banning stuff. But um, so throughout like all of COVID, I'm like foreshadowing and showing like all the things that are going to happen to her. And it's at this point where, you know, the 13 weeks go by, we're still in COVID. She's learned, she hasn't applied any of it. More and more time goes on, and she gets kind of like the gap between us grows even further because she goes down the very fear driven path with how everything was going with the Rona. And it's kind of me on this end where I'm like kind of showing the playbook of what's going to happen and how it's happening and how this was talked about last year. Um and I will say the second separation was definitely because of how I would just say how things kind of got twisted and warped in her head of reality, where she wanted to. We didn't really have any of the vaccine requirements here. And I told her, I was like, there's a study that's going to be done and it's going to be printed out and reported in August. I was just like, if you can please wait to get the vaccine then, because I'm not going to. And I work with physicians and things, and like they knew I wasn't going to. I was allergic to some of the chemicals that were in them. And I told her straight up, I was like, listen, like, I don't care. Like, if you want to get the vaccine, do it, but like, at least wait till August. And the last kind of note that really was like the final nail in the coffin of just putting up with so much shit, was how she went about that. And this stuff really still hurts just because of how it played out. Just full disclosure. I shouldn't say like really hurts because it's not like I dwell in it, but like just talking about it, it's like you can still feel that the body's like, yeah, that sucked. Because it was essentially, I was always the one who would initiate physical intimacy. I can count on my hand how many times she had throughout the 11 years. And that did a whole damage to like my psychology of like my self-worth and my value and my, like attractiveness, or how I felt, how my self-esteem and my attraction level. And there was just one night that she initiated and, did the thing. I always do the thing. Everyone's happy by the end. But um the next day I'm actually getting interviewed on a podcast, and she like starts packing up her stuff and is essentially like, all right, I'm going. And I'm like, where are you heading out to? I'm about to start my show. And she's like, oh, I'm getting my vaccine. And that was, like less than 30 minutes before the interview was about to start. And at that point I pretty much told her, I was just like, listen, like, you need to, like, when you come back, like, know that we're done. And it was one of those things where I don't know if she really understood that that statement was truth, that I was like actually like signing papers again and getting served. Um, because when she came back, it was just interview was over, and it was just kind of just my heart was broken. Um, and the only reason why I had such a, I would say, like, emboldenedness to go and actually just end it right there and then was a few weeks prior. She was late, like late. Like this point, it was like 2 weeks late, and I had done a meditation, and at this point, I was met with an energy, and I can't remember actually if I've talked about this in a previous experience. I might have mentioned something on one of them, but I was actually confronted with a different energy, and it was masculine. It was felt familiar, and all of a sudden, I started getting like these downloads and just like visions, like just straight up like visuals. Like I'm in it, I'm watching it. It's first person, and it was my son that I had met, and it was essentially a life of struggle. I was seeing all the things of like how our relationship devolved, and then with a child, and then custody things, and pretty much the kid being taken away from me, and just a whole drama and repetition of the wounds and the traumas that I was very like, I'm not sending and passing on this stuff to my children. And physically, like, I'm weeping while I'm watching this, and I lose sense of time because I don't know how long it is, but it feels like it was pretty quick. Um, I think the meditation ended up being like an hour or something like that. But it was one of those things where I just kind of like audibly said, I was just like, I don't want this for you. I was like, my heart broke, and it just sunk in the gut. And I was just like, I want better for you. Like, you don't need to come into this. Um, and straight up said, like, I want to do better for you because you don't deserve this. And then it was just kind of like that warm energy just kind of just felt really intimate, and then it was just gone and done. And then that night her period started. Um, and that's when I knew internally that I was just like, oh, like this is done. Like, I'm not supposed to move forward with her. And I was kind of just waiting. I didn't really know when. I had told myself, like, I guess if it's like if something happens again, that's like an opportunity. But it's kind of like one of those moments where I was just like, life kind of let me know. Um, and then that whole aspect happened with the blind side of kind of getting the last nut in, and then doing the vaccine, which they knew I was opposed to, and was directly like against like a personal standard of what I asked for, just like my own safety. And when all that happened, this was like really that testament for myself, like not only through the experience that I had with my son's energy and soul, but the moment itself after, like, all this is done, because it's like, okay, like, well, here we are. This is happening. This is a real thing. So, and for me, I think it's always important to understand, just even contextually too, like, at this point, I'm still been doing my business for a few years. At this point, like 4 years on my own, not nearly making the money that I was making in like big pharma, and she was making more than me, but like, because I'd helped her get her PMP, oh, that was one of those notes that I forgot to mention too. But it's like the whole following the passions and conflict was one of those big ones for me, because when she had her passion to get her project management professional certificate, she had like a nervous breakdown when she failed the exams, like the test exams and things like that, multiple times, because nothing was sticking. So I taught her how to study, and like really sat down with her and like helped her through it. And it was just another one of those notes of just like, okay, like that's a red flag in terms of how failure was responded to. But like, when we circle back to everything, like, every moment that there was a conflict and tension within us, it brought me into a deeper point of truth within myself and with source. And when the final, like, second and final separation was done, I was left with so much uncertainty of like even financial security. I was just like, oh gosh, like, there goes the double income. She was making really, really good money. There was the whole safety and familiarity. Again, it was like 11-year relationship. I guess the whole family thing. What are people going to think? And da da da. Da. And like all those externalized pressures and tropes were really just kind of now getting activated once it was really done and settled in the heart. So for myself, like, I would say just the second separation, especially, was like one of the most courageous things that I've done, because it was me talking with God, being like, listen, like, this hurts so much to have to move on from someone that like I truly love and have been fighting for, not only for them but for us for years. And I just put the team on my back for so long, and like I just couldn't do it anymore. But I give it up to you, creator. I give it up to you, source. Like, I know that you pointed me towards everything that has been happening has been for this reason, of me to really be met with this point of like, hey, are you going to trust in what's after this? Are you going to dance into the unknown? And after the sun experience and just how things kind of like devolved at the end, I was just purely like, okay, I'll do it. And in my kind of like 3 days of fasting and grieving, really just like, staying in the cave, I was met with all of the uncertainty again. And, I think it's those seeds of doubt and hesitation that really hinder us from our faith and our trust. And the entire process of those 3 days was just really just, I would say, reviewing, rolling back the tapes and getting out of the hurt and the harm and the rage of it all, because having those realizations and those moments of just like, I only got intimate with you, like creator, um, because of the suffering that I experienced with us. And it brought me into such a strength and a conviction that like I knew everything was going to be okay. And I remember, the mind at this point, because this is post all the awakenings that I had, and the mind was super active during this time. And I very akin it to like, being in the desert and like the demons and devil trying to tempt you back into the old ways. Because, the crazy outlandishness of like, you're never going to find anyone to love you again, were some of those thoughts that came up. And personally, I was just would bring very straightforward evidence to them and be like, yeah, like I don't want someone to love me like that again. That was terrible. Like, um, and it was still, my own aspects of like feeling my self worth and things like that. And I was like, all right, well, like screw it. I'm not going to sit here and listen to that and entertain those negative thoughts. Like, life, if you got me and things are going to be okay, let me know. And I put Mosley in a backpack, like her little kitty backpack, and went out on a walk. And, at this point, I'm just like earphones in, I should say, I have studio headphones, so I don't really have earbuds, but I had studio headphones on, and I was listening to kind of like a spiritual discourse from, I think it was Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj. Um, and as I'm kind of just like ending my mopiness of just like, you're going to be alone forever. No one's going to ever witness you or see you. Um, there was like a group of ladies that were across the street, and they were like, oh my God, is that a cat? And like they were cute and stuff, but it was kind of like instantly I was like shown that like life is like, hey, you're good. Because it was like a flirty situation. It kind of like was like, oh, okay, I got my groove back a little bit. I've been doing my own thing in the dark for like 3 days. Um, but it was that moment that it was like the kind of the light that shone through. And ever since that moment, and ever since that decision to end that marriage, it was really like the rest of my life thus just then has just gotten even more in alignment with source. I'm now in a very loving relationship. And I would say the healthiest I've been in, the healthiest one I could see. And it's at this point now where like things have been really good, but there's a trap and a temptation to always stay with what is familiar. And for myself, you know, it was a trial of the heart, but I don't regret any of it. I think the stuff that's really sad for me is like just knowing how much, I mean, it's always one of those like double-edged swords things, because it's like, should I have, cut those ties earlier, but you never know until you know. But I know that like the reason why I am who I am now, especially in like the spiritual growth and development, and how I've been able to help people through all the things that I've learned and grown through in that relationship, like every ounce of suffering was transmuted. And I think anyone who's listening to this message now, like, if you made it this far, thank you. But it's just one of those things where even if it's a bad place and a bad relationship and a bad connection, it can liberate you, but it doesn't need to be something that you stay in. And I've seen time and time again people staying in relationships that just don't serve them. And it's that aspect of falling in love with your potential. And it was really funny. I actually had a consultation and met a woman where it was kind of helping her with a we ended up only like really doing like short-term client work, but she was going through almost like an inverse situation. Um, but except this person, instead of kind of like breaking the heart and doing all of like the kind of intangible things that had happened in my relationship of like the coldness and all this other stuff, it was done through like hookers and prostitutes and fucked up stuff like that. But it was very mirroring in the sense. And she said a line that was like, a tiger can't change their stripes. And that always kind of like, I was activated by that at the time. And the closer things got to like, especially the first separation, I was like, wow, like here I am, falling in love with potential instead of, and not reading the signs that life is presenting me and going the path that like life is actually encouraging me towards. Um, yeah, I just got caught up in the hopium and the promise of what was and not what is. And the image for this medicine, or I should say, like the spiritual experience, is actually like a rendition or a render of the engagement photo, where I look at all the signs that life was telling me to like have faith, have trust, like lean in, like, or just don't do it yet, don't do this, don't do that. Um, because when we had gotten to the top of the mountain and the hike, which was our first hike that we did out in Washington, we did it again. The clouds were just like all gray and it got super stormy. Like the moment I started to set up the camera. So it's like I look at who I am now and I'm like, man, I definitely would have been like, ooh, life's saying no. Okay, I get it. I get it. But that's why for me personally, like, without that relationship and growing through the heartbreak, I wouldn't be able to help and inspire and do all the things I do now. And it took those moments of like just pain to transmute into power. So I hope that anyone that kind of goes through those moments of suffering, that you can transmute it and just know that like on the other side, like you will be cared for, you will be supported. Because the moment that you lean into the unknown in this sense and you act courageously for your heart, for your soul, then life rewards you. And I'm very grateful again, like that we ended up not having kids together because I know that would have been an added aspect of reluctancy to actually move forward with my life. And it plays into a role too where it's important because, when it comes down to it, someone has to have the courage to accept the truth and to act on the truth. And if both parties tiptoe around it and no one really either fights for resolution or fights for release, then it's going to lead into a lot of like inevitable suffering that'll just cycle and get worse and worse and worse. So, yeah, I hope that landed how it needed to land for people. But I always just want to give a little peek behind the veil of that we all grow and learn. And because of the sufferings that we experience in life, if we really do seek to unpack and understand the ins, the outs, the kind of five setting questions who, what, when, why, where, how, then we can become really powerful beings and ultimately live with no regrets. Even and I guess the only reason I really feel comfortable talking about this stuff too is like when I was expressing the whole situation and what was going on, and not only like my spiritual perspective and how things had unfolded, but our relation with the marriage counselor, it was very disheartening to have that confirmation and validation of like, yeah, you're right. Um, because on one end, it was like, okay, so you're not just like the spiritually unfolding crazy dude. Um, like, which was like a breath of fresh air, but it was also really sad because it was like, this is now a professional within this and is asking like, how could you put up with that for so long? And it brought even more of a mirror onto my own like trauma responses and things that again got healed after all this. and really got unpacked. And I can't say that I was successful in the relationships after because I did go through a little bit of a gallivanting phase, but that'll be for the future. But I've learned I've learned so much through that relationship, and I only pray and hope that those that are intended to stay together really do meet each other where they need to be at and fight for one another. And that those that are not intended to be together and that are holding on can find peaceful resolution. And that's a big prayer that I have for folks because you have to choose a side when it comes to this reality. And I know it sounds very, you know, dualistic for folks, but like you either serve the light or you serve the dark. And if your path and your experience isn't helping the world, if it isn't helping your loved ones, if it isn't empowering yourself and inspiring and building more connection and inclusivity and just transformation, then you're serving earthly, material, negative, dark things, and it will never lead to something nourishing and everlasting. So, yeah, I feel complete in that. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them. But with that, may the fruit of knowledge offer a seed, and in that seed may your love, will, and intuition give life and nourishment. For a tree shall grow, and in its shade may you find peace, and offer peace to all whom ask. Namaste. I battled it out within you. I love you so much. Thanks for dropping in. This is a little bit longer one, but there was a lot to talk about in terms of just the pain and things of that need to get mentioned and create some context so it could be understood. Because in reality, like this was a testament of, I guess, my own patience and also on the, what was teased at earlier, the negative side of things with how much pain and suffering I was willingly and accustomed to putting myself through. So there's definitely I would say, an important aspect of just healing and liberation that can be spoken on here. And it's the sense of when you are so used to pain and suffering and being treated poorly and not being witnessed and heard, you turn into a caged animal. And that can be met in all the ways where things become more frustrating, you become more irritable, you become more upset, you lose hope. And when you do finally have freedom and you are released out into the wild, it's scary. The grass doesn't, even though you're built for it, it doesn't feel safe because the cage felt safer. And ultimately, that is the lesson of faith and trust that moving on from relationships that hinder our experience, our life, our love, our value, our worth, that they open us up to a whole world of getting accustomed to and recalibrating to what things should feel like that are safe. And it takes a lot of courage. And this is me mirroring words from a friend that happened with all this. And I feel like this is a great note to end on, where it takes a lot of courage to go against the norm and the grain of what people expect from you, to end something that behind the scenes, is just crippling for everyone involved because of how toxic it's become. And to stop that wheel from spinning despite the decade plus of inertia, to then choose the courageous thing for both parties to reconcile, to release, and to live is a gracious act. And it is often the difficult things that are the worthwhile things. And I'm not an advocate for people getting divorced. I should always end with that advisory. But I am an advocate for those willing to really see the truth in things. And it's very apparent if you're with someone who's willing to put in the work to grow and heal. And if they're not, then it's time for you to go. So I hope that everyone can find the strength and resolution and courage and faith and trust that they need to with that. I love you so much. Peace.